Today, I will be showing you how I went about finishing up the entrance of my dungeon build. How are you today? Hope you had a great holiday and got a good break from work for all of those that get a break from work for the holidays. This is the third part of my Building a Dungeon series, and I will be covering how I finished up building the entrance to my dungeon. If you haven't seen the previous two episodes, I would recommend that after you see this video to go back and watch those. I got a lot to show you today, so let's just get into it. In order to go along with the theme that I rolled up for the dungeon, and to add more interest, I decided to add a few final elements to the first dungeon room. First, I want to sculpt a little burn fire to signify a campsite of sorts. I do this by using a hobby knife to cut out rectangular strips of XPS foam into shapes resembling wooden beams. I do a variety of thicknesses just to add some visual interest. With a wire brush, I add a wood grain to my beams. I really dig the wires into the beams so it creates a rough texture that will give it a damaged wooden look. Next, I break off random pieces into a variety of lengths. Breaking off the pieces will give a more realistic look to the end of the pieces of foam that will resemble wood better. I squirt some thinned down PVA glue onto a piece of cardboard and use it to dip the pieces of foam into the wood before placing them onto the little campfire I am building. After assembling the campfire, I move on to building the earth altar in order to allow the PVA glue to dry. I first cut out rectangular pieces of XPS foam that will resemble slabs of rock. I don't really measure anything, but I do compare and eyeball everything as I go. I basically want to create a table-shaped altar. So I will be stacking a larger piece of foam on two smaller pieces in order to create a shape that looks like a stone table. With my hobby knife, I chip the edges of each piece of foam in order to give it that chipped stone look. Afterward, I texture each piece with a chunk of asphalt. I decided I wanted a little more detail, so I use an ultra fine point Sharpie to draw cracks into the foam. The Sharpie melts into the foam and creates some excellent looking cracks. Next, I glue the three pieces together with my hot glue gun. This is fairly straightforward. I just try not to go overboard on the glue so it does not seep out of the cracks. I then glue on some aquarium pebbles on top of the altar. These are going to represent a variety of ores that have been mined in this dungeon. I use a hot glue gun to save time, but PVA would also be sufficient and probably not as messy. I cut out some styrofoam pieces into jagged looking shards that will later represent uncut gemstones. I try to have a lot of clean cuts and lines as it will later help bring out the details more easily. I use some foam-friendly black spray paint to prime the altar. This time I'm using a paint called Licorice by Iron Lac Sugar Coat, and with Iron Lac only the sugar coat will not melt the foam. As you can see, even spraying up close will not melt the foam, which is excellent. Liquitex also makes spray paint that can be sprayed directly on foam, and I do use both. It just depends on what colors they have. I do prefer the Iron Lac Sugar Coat because I like the matte finish it has, but they don't always have the colors I want, so sometimes I get the Liquitex and it just has a little bit more glossy finish to it. I got links in the description. Those are affiliate links, and if you click on them and buy from those links, I do get a little kickback and it will help support this channel. Anyway, next I stipple the altar with two tones of gray paint, a medium gray and a darker gray. Then I do a light dry brush with a cream colored acrylic paint for the highlight. This gives the altar a very stony appearance that will be sufficient enough. While dry brushing, I accidentally knocked off one of my gems, so I hurried and glued it back on. I figured this is good that it happened at this step, because now it will be more stable while playing the game. In my opinion, Vallejo makes one of the best metallic paints, so I used their paint to paint the aquarium gravel I used 3 different colors: bronze, gold, and I think I used oily silver. And I randomly apply these metals to each of the pieces of aquarium gravel. I then paint each of the gems green. This is again a Vallejo model color, as I do find their paint perfect for painting more detailed subjects. The paint was slightly thicker than I wanted, so I ended up thinning it down with some clean water. After the first layer of green paint, I put a drop of blue and a drop of yellow on my palette as well. These will be used to shade and add some variety to the gems. I won't get into that too much as I lost some of the footage. Basically, as you can see here though, I added a small amount of blue to the bottom of each gem and a small amount of yellow to the top pointy spots of the gems. It just adds more variety. Looks way better than just flat gems. At this point in time, the campfire has finally dried. So I go in with some black paint / PVA glue mix and carefully cover the logs as well as the ground around the fire. Basically, I stipple the paint in a circle around the logs so it looks like it's charred stone. Not even waiting for the previous layer to dry, I go in with a darker medium gray and stipple parts of the logs and the ground. I do this sparingly as it is just to add a bit of ashy appearance and a little bit more visual interest in case someone inspects the burned wood planks. Anyway, going back to the altar, I use one of my smaller flat brushes to carefully dry brush white lines onto the edges of the gemstones. This will really bring them to life and make them actually look like gems rather than just being abstract green shapes sitting on a stone table. I then take a bright silver paint and lightly dry brush all the pieces of ore with it. I use the same color of highlight for all the different colors of ore, as it will add visual consistency to the piece. I take inspiration for this next step from the variety of treasure hoard builds I've seen on YouTube, in which people use round glitter to represent coins in the treasure piles. So using that same concept, I sparingly apply thinned down PVA glue to the piece and sprinkle gold and silver glitter onto my altar. And then, with a light gray craft paint, I lightly dry brush the campfire. This really brought out the wood grain and is the final step for the campfire. Again, back to that altar, I use Liquitex gloss varnish to completely cover the gems, the ore, and the glitter coins. And once again, back to that altar, I use Liquitex gloss varnish to completely cover the gems, the ore, and the glitter coins. I do this in one thick coat. This will really seal the glitter in and bring out the shininess of the ore. Also, it will add a little bit more sheen to our gemstones. Now I use Tester's Dull Coat to cover the rest of the altar. This varnish is really great for covering up places I accidentally painted with gloss varnish and will make the stone very dull. Also, it's great protection and stands up to heavy gameplay. Not that I will really be using this piece a lot, but I do want to say it in case you are interested. As a final touch, I paint the bottom of the altar black. This is both to protect the bottom and to add to the appearance. I do not plan on anchoring this altar to the room as it sticks over the wall slightly, and I want to be able to stack and store my dungeon away somewhat easily. At this point in the build, I still felt like there was something missing, so I decided to add some cave moss to the room. I first paint on watered down PVA glue in patches and sprinkle Woodland Scenic's green turf over the spots. Adding moss to your build is also another great way to cover up some of the more obvious seams and mistakes you've made, so this will really help this room, I think. I also make sure to sprinkle some on top of the pools, both so the fish have some vegetation to munch on, and also so it adds more of a depth look to the water. After the moss dries completely, I water down some more PVA glue and dab a coat over the top of all the mossy splotches. This will really lock in the moss and prevent it from shedding. The only downside to doing this is that you will lose some of the color variety of the green turf, as there's more than just one solid green that comes in the turf. It's kind of a darker and a medium and a yellowish green. So if you're worried about that, you can always lightly dry brush the moss with different colors of greens and yellows, though honestly, I think it looks just fine as it is. So while that coat of glue is drying, let's take a look at the earth altar again. It really looks good after the varnish is cured. That gloss coat over the metallics just looks amazing to me. I always like doing that, even on some of like weathered looking metal. I do it in spots, which you'll see in my next build. Well, it's not a build. My next painting a miniature to go in this dungeon. It's the main creature in this dungeon that the characters will run into when they enter the cave. Sort of an introduction creature. But there's lots of different rust effects, and also I still use a little bit of gloss varnish in spots to represent the metal. You'll see later. Anyway, so since I did not varnish the stone before adding the water, and I want the water to stay glossy, I decided to hand paint the stone and mossy areas with matte varnish. I am using Liquitex matte varnish for this step. I paint it liberally over the entire piece except for the pools. Adding the varnish over the moss will lock it in even more. At this point, it is very unlikely that the moss will ever shed off, even with heavy gameplay. I then decided to add a light coat of gloss varnish to the pools. I honestly kind of regretted this, as the water was actually more shiny before I added that coat. Regardless, no one will see the difference when I get this out on the table. As a final step, I touch up the black areas with a mixture of matte varnish and black paint. I just want to make sure it has that clean look to it. Even though it's like a natural room, I still want it to have that clean look, and this black layer will help that significantly. This is something I've been doing a lot lately. On the bottom of all the terrain I build that I sell on eBay and Etsy, I always paint a layer of black on bottom. Just really helps bring out the piece. Even though most of the time you don't see that spot, when you pick it up, people can tell it's like high quality stuff. So we have the final result of the first dungeon room in this build, which is the entrance. And this is what we turned out with for the first room. This has been a great start to the dungeon build, and I really got the creative process flowing. Stay tuned next week for a fourth part to this series. In that episode, I will be painting a miniature. So it's going to be a little bit off from what I've been doing with the rest of my channel. So we're just going to do a quick miniature and add an enemy to this first dungeon room. So it's still part of the dungeon build. I just want to let you know it's going to be a little bit different. Then we'll be getting on we will be doing one of the adjacent cave rooms. So that's basically what people want to see next, and I want to give you guys whatever you want to see next. Also, don't forget to check out my Patreon page if you want to help support this channel. That's definitely much appreciated. I really appreciate the patrons I have right now, so thank you guys for keeping up with everything. Don't forget to like and subscribe this video so it gets out there, and leave a comment below. Any comment, I love to hear whatever you have to say to me, bad or good. In fact, you can even dislike this video if you don't like it. Definitely prefer the likes, boost my self-esteem a little bit. What else? I don't know. Let me know which room you want to see next. You can go back to the very first video, and I'm planning out the dungeon. There's two adjacent rooms that I may be doing next. It's either the one, I can't remember exactly what rooms they are. It's like, I think there's a room that has, oh, what is it? It's like a load room is what it's called, I believe. And I plan on doing a bunch of like ores and crystals in that room. And the other room is one that has spider webs, I believe. So they're both going to be a bit of a challenge, and I should be able to show you a lot of good stuff if you stay tuned for those. So yeah, you'll want to subscribe and hit the bell icon below, because I don't have a certain day I post, but I'm going to be posting regularly. So yeah, let's keep this YouTube channel going. I'm well over 500 subscribers strong now, and it's very motivating to keep going. So thank you guys so much for watching.